Hello, and welcome to week 2. Today, Tuesday recording is going to be over chapter 2 material. As we go over chapter 2, I want to just go over some things that I think that are important for us to remember about chapter 2 and things that I find very important about this chapter. Chapter 2 is organizations in the workplace. Which one fits you best? There are 5 different types of organizations that we're going to go over today. As you can see, there's the traditional, human relations, human resources, systems contingency, and also last, transformational. We're going to go over each one separately. The traditional has several different characteristics, and the one that we're going to go over that I think are important is the fact that we have to understand that managers in different types of organization will approach problems and relate to their employees and use communication skills quite differently. In the traditional organization, managers motivate employees with control, with structure, and sometimes with money. The traditional uses usually 2 different approaches. The first approach that they use is the scientific approach, and then there's also the bureaucratic approach. Let's go over each of these approaches. In the scientific approach, it is an approach where the scientists have designed each task, and the scientific selections of workers happens, and they also make sure that each worker is adequately trained and receives rewards, and the manager is also responsible for the division of labor and responsibilities. The second approach was the bureaucratic approach. And in the bureaucratic approach, there are clear divisions of labor, definitely a clear chain of command, which usually, as we learned in chapter 1, the communication is usually always a downward way. There's a very small span of control, and you will definitely see that what happens is that usually the command and everything else is from the top and is sent down. The traditional organization still dominates today's workplace, such as the government, agencies, education, institutions, and many other firms. They think that the traditional method or way to organize is the best. The second type of organization that we're going to go over is the human relations. In the human relations organization, the focus is usually on social and psychological employee needs. So the employee is very, very important when it comes to the human relations organization. Also, something for us to remember in the human relations organization, the workers' attitudes and their personal relationships are very important, and they take those into consideration. Usually, workers' attitudes also help to affect the productivity more than the working conditions. So, in other words, the happier the employees are, then they will be very productive, even if they work in shambles. The personal relationships that the employees have is also very important because it affects productivity. The third type of organization is the human resources organization. And this organization came about because it evolved from the human relations model. But in this one, it definitely involves the employees in all of the decisions that are made within the organization. In the human resource organization, McGregor developed two types of theories. He developed something called Theory X, and he also has something called Theory Y. In the Theory X, he says that this is a very poor way to basically run your company because it also follows a lot of the traditional styles of management where the messages, like we talked about earlier, travel down. The upward messages from the employees to the managers are very limited. There's a lot of fear and distrust of the manager. And like we said before, the decisions are made by top management and usually not by employees at all. So that's why McGregor considered this as Theory X, and he says that Theory X is a very poor way to run a company. Then he also came up with the Theory of Y, and he says that the Theory Y is the best way, and usually this is remnant of the human relations or human resources, the human relations model. In this particular model, the messages travel in all directions. The decisions are shared and based on a complete input from everyone. There's also great feedback and listening, and they are both encouraged. The atmosphere of confidence and trust exists because of the fact that there is so much openness. And downward messages, it sometimes actually helps to satisfy the employees when it's not done in an over amount or a vast amount, as long as there is continual communications between all parties. So that is what we have to say about human resources. Moving on, we're going to go over the fourth model. And the fourth model is the systems and contingency. In this one, we recognize that no organizational model is a single best way. That in this particular model, the systems and contingency model, that many models can work in some situations, and some models can work in other situations and industries, but it all depends on internal and external factors. So there are the system thinking and the contingency thinking. In the system thinking, this is when you view an organization as a whole and the interactions of its parts. So all organizations or all parts of the organization, in other words, interact and they affect each other because the organization as a whole and it has interacting parts. Both formal and informal communication is definitely key to how the parts interact together. So it's very important for great communication in all levels. And each system values both the control and the relationship. So they are very important. Not only is control like the communication traveling down, but there's also an important factor that is placed into the system thinking, and that is the relationships between the management and the employees. The fourth thing to remember about system thinking is that organizations that use this type of of way are open systems with flexibility and communication boundaries. So in other words, even though they're flexible, there are also communication boundaries. There are things that aren't said from the manager to the employee. There are things that aren't said from the employees to the managers, or things that aren't said between managers or between employees. So the system thinking, like I said, is definitely considered something as a whole, but because of the interactions of all the parts that go into this particular system. The second part of the system contingency is the contingency thinking. And the contingency thinking is similar to systems thinking, but it includes different versions of how to adapt. So basically, the leadership adapts to this particular way of thinking by using styles that can fit them. In other words, if the manager is well-liked and powerful with well-defined tasks, then the manager is liked. If the manager is relatively powerless with poor defined tasks, usually that manager is disliked. But the traditional orientation works best, usually. When the contingency thinking is using the human relations orientation, that is when it's best when the manager is moderately liked and the manager is somewhat powerful and the tasks are moderately defined. So you can see how in contingency thinking, it varies according to the way you run or you think within your organization or how your employees view you. The last form of organization, or the last organizational model, is the transformational. And the transformational organizational model came about from the need of today's businesses in the business environment to transform past models into new structures. So basically, although there were past models such as the system contingency, the human relations, or the human resources, there became a need for new structures to happen within those types of organizations. So basically, the transformational came about because of that and because of the need. The need was the fact that we needed to start thinking about multi-unit organizations. And in multi-unit organizations, there are some things that are important, the reason why they came about. And it usually is a decentralized structure made up of separate anonymous businesses under the same holding company, such as like General Electric and Johnson & Johnson and Cisco and Google. Those types of organizations came because of the fact that they want to decentralize the structures. And they became flexible due to smaller sizes, which is usually 500 or fewer employees in each multi-unit. So it's like a big company that has to basically be put under the same holding company, but just in smaller organization units. The second part of transformational organizational structure is something called virtual organizations. And in virtual organization is often, very often, just a temporary venue of several companies. And each company has its separate things that they particularly do. And an example of this would be like O Magazine, or things such as a company such as that, where usually the employment in these are very conditional and short term. And it's usually most successful when you want to do like a startup company. But each person within this virtual organization has separate and defined tasks that they do. And that is why it's so important to use this particular part of organizational models. So, I know this was a short chapter, but that's okay. So now let's basically summarize the chapter in saying that when you are trying to choose what type of organization you want to work for, you want to find one that best fits your career choices. And you need to have knowledge about the organization and their particular model that they use to see if you will fit in, because maybe perhaps you're not one that likes the traditional methods of where the power is always at the top and you are definitely going to be looked at as a subordinate. So, or maybe you like the fact that you want to work in a more relaxed atmosphere where the employees matter and they make a lot of the decisions. So those are things that you should consider when you are trying to choose what type of organization you want to work for. Also, make sure that you understand that communication is very important regardless of what model you choose or type of organization you choose to work for. And also feedback is important. Remember, we talked about that in chapter 1. And the company expectations vary significantly between the models. So you make sure that when you're picking the type of organization you want to work for, make sure that you do your research and find out what type of organizational model does the company that you choose to work for actually uses. Well, that's all I have for you for chapter 2. And we will discuss chapter 3 on Thursday. Also, I want to make you aware of the fact that make sure you check to see what is due this week so that you can get a good start on it early. And I hope to see that you all respond to the discussion question that has been asked for you, and that you all get your discussion credit for attending this particular video recording for Tuesday. Have a great day, and I will see you again on Thursday.